Do you fall in love with fall every year like I do? Are you looking for a fall cocktail that embodies the fall spirit, even if the leaves aren't changing where you live, or maybe they don't change at all? Well, I've created 3 fall cocktails inspired by the Green Mountains of Vermont, arguably the most beautiful fall foliage display there is, and I'll be using all Vermont spirits and ingredients in today's cocktails. So follow me. See what I did there? Follow me. So now it is time to shake things up. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's me, Mark Addison, and today on Shaking Things Up, we're celebrating fall with 3 Vermont-inspired cocktails that I created for Cocktail Chameleon. I think I fall in love with fall every year because I'm originally from Miami, Florida, which is basically seasonless Miami, Florida. But I moved to New York over 20 years ago and took many trips to Vermont, and then just over a year ago, I moved to Vermont full-time. So when I think of fall, I think of the fall Vermont foliage that is arguably the most stunning in the country. And I jokingly call it the Fruity Pebble Mountain range because it's so delicious to look at. The 3 cocktails I'm going to make for you today are all inspired by Vermont, and I'll be using all Vermont spirits and ingredients, starting with the Green Mountain Mule, which is inspired by the Moscow Mule, only I switch out the vodka for a Vermont rye whiskey, and I add a dash of Vermont maple syrup for sweetener, naturally. And then we have the Northeast Kingdom Punch, which is named for the Northeast region of Vermont and celebrates apples with flavors of apple brandy, fresh apple, and hard apple cider. And then we have our sweet, delicious baked apple martini, which is like a dessert martini, which celebrates apples with fresh apple cider and an apple pie simple syrup. And of course, a Vermont vodka. And what's that bourbon over there for? Well, stay tuned to the end, because if we have time, I'm going to share with you a special Vermont-inspired cocktail that has its origins in another city where I lived. Can you guess which one? Leave me a comment below if you figured it out. Let's get shaken. The Green Mountain Mule is inspired by the popular Moscow Mule, although it was created in Vermont, so it might not be as familiar to flatlanders, those unfortunate enough not to live in the state. To start, we're going to take a cocktail shaker filled with ice, and I'm using my Boston-style cocktail shaker that we have available on cocktailchameleon.com. And to that, I'm going to add 2 ounces of a Vermont rye whiskey. And I'm using Whistle Pig rye whiskey, which is an iconic Vermont rye whiskey, which you can find all over the country and even all over the world. And to that, I'm going to add a ½ ounce of our very own Vermont maple syrup from here on Moscow Farm. It's also available on our website. And then I'm going to add a ½ ounce of some fresh squeezed lime juice. It's so important to use fresh squeezed lime juice whenever making cocktails because it adds just so much more of an authentic lime flavor. And then we're going to take the contents of our mixing glass. We're going to pour it into our shaking tin, give it a little tap, and give it a good shake. Now I'm shaking this primarily to incorporate the maple syrup and the whiskey and the lime juice together. Otherwise, the maple syrup might stick on the bottom of your glass and not incorporate fully. All right, so I think that's a good shake. Give it a little tap. And then we're going to take it and pour it back into our mixing glass, because that's the fun of making cocktails. We get to see all the beautiful creations that we make. And then I'm going to take the glass, which is a standard double old-fashioned glass, and I'm going to simply pour the ingredients of the mixing glass into our double old-fashioned. And I'm going to top with a nice 2-ounce pour of a good ginger beer. I'm using Fever Tree ginger beer. I really love it because they use 3 different types of ginger, and I like using ingredients in glass bottles because they hold their carbonation and their flavor is much more bright. And then we're going to add a lime wedge. And there we have the Green Mountain Mule inspired by the Moscow Mule, but with a tinge of Vermont maple syrup that adds a nice smoky flavor and a zingy sweetness to an otherwise spicy cocktail. As the Vermont greenery gives way to the fiery tones of fall, this cocktail celebrates the endless ease of summer with the flavors of fall yet to come. And I call it the Northeast Kingdom Punch. Now we're going to be building this cocktail in a large glass pitcher. So we're going to start with 5 ounces of an apple brandy. And I'm using a Vermont apple brandy. And I poured 5 ounces into my measuring glass. I like using measuring glasses when you're measuring out larger quantities over a jigger, a 1 ounce, 2 ounce jigger, because it gets very repetitive and this makes it much, much easier. And as always, I'm gonna be linking all the products that we used in the videos and the recipes down in the description box below, so definitely go check that out. Next, I'm gonna be adding our homemade rosemary cider maple syrup, which we made on our last episode of Bar Basics, our new series, and you can check that out here on this card, and I'm also putting that link below. So that's going to be another 5 ounces of our rosemary cider maple syrup. It has lovely herbaceous quality of the rosemary, and the apple cider that's mixed in with the maple syrup cuts down on the sweetness and adds another zingy apple element to this punch. And then we're going to be adding 5 ounces of lemon juice. And we'll give it a good stir. We want to make sure that we are mixing in the rosemary cider maple syrup and just combining everything really well. All right, so that looks good to me. And then we're going to add a cup of peeled and chopped apple. Now we're going to put some saran wrap over the top and put it into the refrigerator for about 4 to 8 hours or until you're ready to serve. So the punch is now well chilled, and I'm going to give it another stir just to make sure everything is incorporated. And when you're ready to serve, you're going to add a 16-ounce can of Vermont hard cider. And I'm using Silo hard cider. It's a really nice dry cider, and it has really nice tight little almost like champagne bubbles. We're going to add that to our punch. And then we're going to top with about 16 ounces of some cold club soda or sparkling water, whichever you prefer. And you do this just before serving because you want to make sure that you're maintaining those nice tight bubbles in both the hard cider and your sparkling water. And I'm going to give it a little stir, not too much as to agitate it. That looks great. And now we are ready to serve it up in our glass. And I like using glass mugs for this. This is a Vermont glass mug by Simon Pierce, one of our favorite glass blowers here in Vermont. And I'm gonna add a scoop of the apples because you wanna make sure you divide up the apples evenly amongst the glasses that you're serving. And then I'm gonna just fill up with the rest of our delicious Northeast Kingdom punch. Oh, that looks absolutely stunning. Now to garnish, we're going to add a lemon wedge to the edge of our mug and a couple of fresh slices of red and green apples. And here we have the Northeast Kingdom Punch. It celebrates apples from the first sip to the last with our apple brandy, our apple cider maple syrup, and of course, our hard cider and fresh apples. Nothing evokes autumn like the tantalizing smell and taste of a freshly baked apple pie. And this next cocktail, the Baked Apple Martini, fits the bill to a T. And you can also scale it up and serve it in a pitcher for your next fall outdoor gathering or as a dessert cocktail for Thanksgiving. Yeah, a dessert cocktail. That's a thing. But first we have to prepare our glass. We're going to prepare our glass with a decorative and tasty spiced sugar rim. And my trick to adhering the sugar to the rim is to use a simple syrup. And I'm using the same simple syrup in our recipe, the baked apple pie, which we created in our last episode of Bar Basics, which I'll put a link down below. So I'm going to add just a little bit of simple syrup to a small plate. And I'm going to take the rim of our martini glass and I'm going to just turn it and gently coat it with a little bit of simple syrup and going back one more time to get a nice even coat and shake a little excess off. I like to tap a little bit on the glass there. And then I'm going to roll it or dredge it in our apple pie spiced sugar mixture. And the recipe is in Cocktail Chameleon. And here we have a beautiful and tasty sugar spiced rim for our baked apple martini. Now it's time to shake up our baked apple martini, and I'm going to be using our Boston style shaker set again, but this time in gold. And these are available on our website, and you can grab a link down below. We're going to start with our mixing glass filled with ice. And this recipe is easy as a 1, 2, 3. We're going to start with 3 ounces of a fresh apple cider. There's 2 ounces and 1 more. And then we're going to add 2 ounces of vodka. And again, I'm using a Vermont vodka from Silo Distillery. And we're going to add 1 ounce of our homemade apple pie simple syrup. Again, you can check out that link to the Bar Basics simple syrup video that we created just last week. Next, we're going to take the contents of our mixing glass, pour it into our shaking tin, give it a little bit of a tap, and give it a shake. So I'm just going to shake this until the shaking tin is very cold to the touch, because we're going to be serving this straight up or without ice, so we want to make sure it's very well chilled. Woo! I think that's good. Nice and frothy. So we'll take our prepared glass, and with a Hawthorne strainer, I'm going to simply strain it into our prepared martini glass, all the way up to the top. And then we're going to garnish it with a cinnamon stick, which happened to be a little bit short to sit on the rim of the glass. So my trick is to take a toothpick and put it into just far enough into the cinnamon stick so that this will rest on the edge of the bottom of the glass, and it will rest nicely on the rim of the glass, so then we can hang a dried apple as our garnish. How stunning is that? So here we have the baked apple martini, and I promise it's just like your mama's apple pie or your money back. As promised, here is the Bonus Vermont inspired cocktail, which has its origins in one of the cities I used to live in. Did you guess? It's the Manhattan, or in this case, I call it the Vermont. Because with the addition of a maple liqueur and a dash of nutty walnut bitters, it tips it over the border from New York to Vermont. Because New York and Vermont are neighbors. Did you know that? A little geography lesson for you today. To mix the Vermont, I'm going to be using a mixing glass, and I'm using our Cocktail Chameleon mixing glass, which is individually available on our website. And to the mixing glass, I'm going to add 3 ounces of a Vermont bourbon, and I'm using Silo Distillery's local corn distilled bourbon. And then I'm going to add 1.5 ounces of a maple liqueur, which is also made here in lovely Vermont. And then I'm going to add 3 dashes of a walnut bitters. You can use other different flavors of bitters depending on what your preferences are, but I like the walnut bitters because it pairs really nicely with the maple liqueur. And now I'm just going to give this a nice stir so that I am going to chill down the ingredients without over-watering it. So that's the difference between shaking a cocktail and stirring a cocktail, is that you are gently cooling the mixture down so as not to impart too much water. That feels nice and cold. And now we're ready to present our cocktail in our glass. And I'm using a double old-fashioned glass from Simon Pierce here in Vermont. And I'm going to put in a king cube. Now these are large ice cubes. They call them king cubes. You can buy special molds for them, and I'll put a link down below so you can pick one up. And then I'm going to strain the mixture over the king cube into our awaiting double old-fashioned. That looks absolutely delicious. Now, classically, you would garnish a Manhattan with a cherry, but since we are in Vermont, we are going to garnish it with an apple slice. And I have dried some apples here on the farm, and I cut a little slit in it. I'm just going to delicately rest it right on the edge for our Vermont-inspired Manhattan-style cocktail, the Vermont. Enjoying one of these fall Vermont-inspired cocktails is the next best thing to enjoying the fall season here in Vermont. And stay tuned to next week's Shaking Things Up, because we're going to shake up some spooktacular Halloween cocktails. So please subscribe and hit the notification button, because you'll receive an email every time we post a new video. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, leave us a comment below and hit that subscribe button there. Oh, Here's the next Shaking Things Up.